Next, from Chicago, Illinois Channel correspondent Jeff Berkowitz sits down with Ted Dabrowski, the Vice President of Policy for the Illinois Policy Institute, as Mr. Dabrowski explains how the state can pass a balanced budget without raising taxes. This runs about 25 minutes.
Ted Dabrowski, should there be a tax increase of $5.4 billion?
There should not be a tax increase of $5.4 billion or $7 billion or $8 billion.
Nothing, zero. You want a zero tax increase, is that right? In terms of the state, zero increase in the income tax, in the sales tax, nada, nothing.
No, so I think what we need to do is understand that there's been a narrative that there's only one way to fix Illinois, and that's through billions in tax hikes. But most Illinoisans know that the difficulty has been that there's been no reforms done in decades, and that this government, and over the last few decades, has been overspending, overpromising, and has made a mess of Illinois. So what we don't need to do is bail out the politicians again through tax hikes. What they need to do is pass all the big reforms that we've been talking about for a long time, for decades now. And until we do that,
who's been talking about
we the collective people that want to see a state that's better run and that takes care of its people and its taxpayers first.
So the broad parameters are, the Illinois state budget is how much in terms of spending? Currently, and what's fiscal year 2018 that we're approaching?
It's running some kind of rate of $40 billion, and we don't even know. You know why? Because
there's not been a budget for 2 years.
There's not been a budget, so it's on autopilot.
So the courts and other entities sort of set it, not the state legislature has some impact, but we think 39 to 40 billion are being spent each year for the last few years around it. And the revenue coming in is about how much?
It's about 32 to 33.
So we're
running about a $6 to $7 billion
or
deficit.
Possibly an $8 billion deficit.
But again, that's only because we're running on court orders and consent decrees, not because, right, it's because our legislature did not pass a budget.
Okay, so you think you have a document called, what's the document
Budget
called?
Solutions 2018.
And people can find that where?
On the IllinoisPolicy.org.
Okay, and that will lay out a program by which you have a balanced budget for fiscal year 2018. That means you will have revenue coming in of about 32 billion, spending of about 32 billion, and it'll be a balanced budget. Is that right?
That's right.
People would say, can you really cut $8 billion from what we're spending now and have people have the kind of society, the kind of state they want?
Well, I think we have to remember that the last time we had a budget, a full budget, back in the 2014 under the old tax rates, we spent $36 billion. So this whole thing of spending $40 to $41 billion is really a shiny object to get us off the path.
It's actually closer, I think, to 35. 35, 30, you're saying fiscal year 2015 was the last, fiscal year 2015 was the last time the state of Illinois had a balanced budget.
And it wasn't balanced, if you remember, because Quinn left a budget that was not balanced, so they had to balance it at the very end.
Rauner worked with Madigan to do that. They actually worked together. So 35, 36 billion was okay then people would say, but there's been inflation, there's been changes in the last 2 years. Can you really go back to 36? You want to take, let's take 2 steps. You're saying you can go back to 36, which was what we had 2 years ago, and then you want to take it further to 32, but haven't there been changes? And people say, can you get by 2 years later, 2017, fiscal 2018, in the same thing we had 2 years before?
So I think the question that has to be asked is, why is government spending growing so fast? Where is all the money going? And we have to then ask a separate question. We had a massive tax hike in 2011 that brought in 32 billion new dollars, new tax dollars out of people's wallets. And
over a 4-year period.
From 2011 through 2014.
4 years, 32
4
billion.
years. And we ended up with the exact same problems that we had in Illinois, but they were worse after those 4 years of tax hikes. Where did the money go? And those are the questions that the taxpayers are asking. People shouldn't be forced to pay more and more until we reform how we spend.
Did it go mostly to pension payments, which run about $7 billion?
That's right. About 90% of that tax hike money went to pensions. Okay. Pensions were unreformed. We didn't pay down the bills. Our economy got worse. We were downgraded 5 times while we had all those extra revenues by the rating agencies. Things went south despite the economy recovering nationally and despite all that money in Springfield's coffers.
But we did, when Rauner came in, the unpaid bills, which are now 14 billion, was probably down to 2 or 3 billion?
No, that's incorrect. So
what were they when he came in?
Before the tax hike,
2 years ago?
Before the tax hike, they're around 8 something. After the tax hike, there were 6 something. So you had a couple
Okay.
$billion in reduction. That's after taking in $32 billion.
Well, we were running balanced budgets essentially during those years, is that right?
No, we haven't had a balanced budget
Or
since
close,
2001.
we weren't running deficits of $7 to $8 billion, to be fair, 2011 to 2015, were we?
No, we weren't running as big a deficits, no.
Much smaller.
Much smaller,
Okay.
yes.
Okay,
But they were
That's-
deficits.
okay, so what would you do? You're king now, you can do anything to get the spending down to $32 billion from the current 40. Lay it out.
All right, so the first thing you got to do is set the narrative that we don't need tax hikes to fix our problems. And you're going to put the taxpayer first, and you're going to say, first thing we're going to do is ensure that all overspending, all waste, all bloat, all duplication, all those things have to go before you ever talk about tax hikes.
Okay, let's get to the big things.
Sure.
There's no line item, as they say,
Right.
for bloat, to cut bloat. So you folks want a property tax freeze, the governor wants a
Well, let's start
property
with
tax-
number one. Let's
What-
start with
okay,
number
what
one.
is number one?
We've got to stop creating more and more pension debt.
Okay.
Every year, that's consuming more
So
and more
true,
taxpayer.
true pension reform, right?
So, right, and the only reform that we can do right now that's constitutional is to move all new workers to 401Ks and give existing workers the option to go into a 401K. That's the most we can do constitutionally. We can also offer some buyouts and things like
You call
that,
those self-managed plans?
self-managed plans.
401K style?
Correct.
That is completely constitutional. There's no
Constitutional.
question about
No
that.
question about that. And what it does is you stop accruing these pensions that we cannot control and which have been politicized forever.
So all new employees go into these SMP self-managed plans?
Correct.
But does that now, people say, and the current employees can opt in if they want, right?
Correct.
Does that do enough soon enough to allow you to help cut the $8 billion from spending?
So it doesn't change the amount of debt we have to the pension funds. It doesn't touch
Okay.
that, okay? But
Come
what
back
it
to that
does-
later.
We'll come back to that later
Let's
because
talk about
that is a debt.
deficit as opposed, stocks and flows. We're talking about a flow, we're talking about getting the deficit down. We'll talk about the 130 or 200 billion
Correct.
in
That's-
liabilities later.
That's a debt that we have to pay. But
Okay.
right now, I think what politicians owe the taxpayers is to stop the pension crisis from continuing to get worse and worse every year. And that's what we have now. I think it's an insult, frankly, to the taxpayers.
Okay. So now
to
but
ask them to pay
explain
billions,
to
but
me-
hang on, Jeff, but to ask them to pay billions more when they haven't made the one key reform that stops pensions from growing. So that's number one.
Okay, so now, under this current plan, the state has to put in a payment of $7 to $8 billion, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's a lot of money. That's almost a quarter of the budget.
And it continues to grow every year.
But you've got a way to reduce that money by how much? I mean, how do we get, what will be the amount going into pensions when you have a self-managed plan? What will be the savings from doing that as opposed to doing it the way
So
we're doing now?
there's some immediate savings that can be had from some reforms that are in the plan and how we pay that debt over
Right.
time. But of course, we don't change the debt that's owed. But I
No,
think.
but I'm talking about that flow. Right now, it's a big deal to make a payment of, say, $7 billion.
Correct.
Can we chip away at that? Can you tell me, can we decrease that payment by $1.5 billion or so?
So in the short term,
So I
we
think
can.
your document says
In the
that.
short term, we can get about
can.
1.6 billion. Part of that is from changing some of the way that assumptions impact the payments that the state has to make, right? And so right now, the pension funds can change the assumptions and force the government to pay much, much more into the pension funds. We need to change how that works.
And that will
number
allow
two-
you to create a new contribution schedule.
Correct. And
And
by,
that saves you how much?
that
About
can,
a
we can
billion?
save about 1.6 billion in 2018.
Okay, so there are two things. You're changing the contribution schedule. You're also phasing in the costs of the pension fund, making these actuarial changes over a 5-year period. Altogether, you're saving 1.6 billion. Okay.
Now there's
So that's 1.6 of the 7 billion to 8 billion you're going to save.
correct.
Okay.
And there's another billion in pensions, another 1.4 billion in pensions where you shift the costs of pensions. Right now, the state is making 1.4 billion in pension payments on behalf of school districts. Teachers are not employees of the state. They're employees of individual school districts. And the state is making the pension payments on behalf of universities for their pension payments,
So that'll save you, what,
1.4 billion. And
Now-
it's not just a savings. Now, it does shift the cost to the school districts and to the
Right.
universities. But I'll tell you why that has to happen. One, not only is it not a cost to the state, but it will change how pensions are doled out, how salaries are doled out, and benefits are doled out at the local government
Because the
levels.
local governments are paying the village of Winnetka, the village of Wilmette, Chicago, which claims it currently pays its pension, that's another matter. But all of these villages, cities around the state, the school districts, are going to have to pick up these costs. And since they're going to pick up the costs in the olden days, and currently, they try to spike things. They try to say, here's your last few years, we don't pay the pensions, so we'll jack up your salary. People try to limit that in this legislature, they don't seem able to. We'll jack up your salary, you'll get higher pensions, but folks, it's okay because we're not paying it, the state is.
That's right, school
That's their
districts
argument, right?
are hiking salaries, they're handing out pension
But
benefits.
now, under your plan, they would have to pay it, so your point is, they'll be more frugal because they're taxpayers in Wilmette, in Bartlett, in Hoffman Estates, in Rockford, all these places we are. All of those areas, these people are gonna say, hey, let's be careful with this, because this money's coming from us.
They're going to be more prudent because it's going to take local tax dollars to pay for it. And when they're responsible for whatever they dole out, okay, so that's a big part of the incentive structure to change how much pensions are being doled
So
out.
that's part of the free market, liberty-oriented approach of you guys,
Well,
not the Illinois policy.
Yeah, and I wouldn't call it free market, liberty-oriented. What I'd call it is
Well-
putting accountability where it belongs.
Well, it is
Because-
free
because,
market.
Jeff,
Go ahead.
no, Jeff, because if a school district wants to dole out super high salaries, which means super high pensions, they should bear that cost. And right now, school districts are doling out those benefits and high salaries, but asking the state taxpayers to pay for it. And that's where there's a disconnect between a unit of government that doles out the benefits
Right.
and then who pays for it.
Well, I would say free market in the sense, you know, you folks are not anarchists. You understand there has to be a certain amount of government, but you'd like to minimize the role of government. And when you have government, even Milton Friedman, Capitalism and Freedom, Milton was not an anarchist. He understood there are certain things that have to be provided by government, but you try to mimic the marketplace and set incentives. So this is giving government, as they run the schools, or at least the financing of the schools, whether they should run it, another matter, they have the right incentives. To me, that's a free market approach, because in a free market, you constantly have people balancing benefits and costs. In the government, you don't unless you set up those incentives. Is that, you
Yeah,
agree?
and you can also create incentives to game the system, which
But
is
the wrong
effectively,
kinds of incentives.
which is effectively
Okay.
what we have today.
Okay, so we
So
saved
that's
one,
very important for the pension
on the
reform.
pension so far, you've saved $3 billion of the $8 billion you've got to save. Where do we go next?
Okay, after that, you look at property taxes. Now, interestingly enough, property taxes are not part of the state budget.
All right.
But we like to talk about, you know, setting this up as comprehensive local property tax reform. The big issue there is that the state mandates many costs at the local level that push up the cost of property taxes. Not only that, they subsidize tremendous amounts of money that go to local governments. And so when you subsidize and mandate local governments to do more and more, the local governments get bigger and bigger, and they cost more and more. So a way to unwind all that, and again, let me remind everybody here that Illinois has the highest property taxes in the nation. So it's this combination of the state and local industrial complex, if you will, that's pushing up Illinois' property taxes to be the highest in the nation. So how do you fix that?
Before you
start
go to fix
you
this-
start to unwind it.
Okay, but that's just so I don't forget, we'll come to the unwinding. But why is that important? Why are property taxes being high relative to other states important? Why are taxes being high in Illinois relative to other states important? I mean, tell me, why is that important?
Well,
Maybe it's obvious, but
Well, I think it's pretty obvious when you have a legislature that's talking about a $5 to $7 to $9 billion tax hike, when Illinois already paid the highest property taxes in the nation. You're wondering,
who does it hurt? How does it hurt the state of Illinois to have higher taxes than Wisconsin and other states?
well, I think in the end, you're talking about, this is people's livelihoods. For people to live here, they've got to be able to pay their bills, to save money, fund their children's education,
And where
have a
does-
job, and so
where-
higher and
where-
higher property taxes.
So aside from the more money's coming out of their pocket, where do they get any of their money, most people?
So they get it from jobs. And
Jobs, so
higher
that's
property
my
taxes,
point, is
I'm
jobs.
about to
Okay.
get there. So
Yeah.
higher property taxes mean, right, that employers have a hard time locating in Illinois, or either staying in Illinois or coming into
flee.
Illinois.
We're
They
losing
flee.
we're losing
People-
population, we're
people are
losing
being-
companies.
People are being squeezed out of their homes, and all of that creates a negative
Okay.
environment where you have a declining tax
Okay,
base.
so if you want to freeze property taxes, is that right?
Correct.
The governor wants to freeze property taxes.
I think most people are in alignment with, actually I shouldn't say most, but there's a big move for everybody in Illinois who pays property taxes.
So won't
wants
the
to freeze.
Democrats say, we'll give you 2 years? Freeze it for 2 years and then we'll see how it's working. What's wrong with that? Because, you know, it's a radical change to have this freeze. Maybe it's not going to work so well. Isn't that reasonable to try for 2 years?
It's not reasonable. We know that in 2 years, the cost will continue to bubble underground, right? Contracts are still going. People can, school districts, governments they can borrow, they can continue to borrow, they can continue to accrue debt, accrue cost.
So what
and then when
happens
the
in
2 year
2
freeze
years?
finishes, we're back to normal.
So when you say, do you want a permanent tax freeze, the governor's talking about a 4-year tax freeze. When he was thinking about going along with the tax increase, he said, okay, you want this tax increase, you want it for 4 years? Give me a 4-year property tax freeze. You guys okay with that?
No, right now, I think we shouldn't be mixing those two things together. I think.
Which are the two things?
Which is saying that we would accept a tax hike if we had a property tax freeze. You've got to remember, we're talking about a property tax freeze at the highest level in the U.S. So it is no gift to Illinoisans.
Because it's a freeze, it's not a cut.
It's a freeze, right, and you're freezing at the highest level in the nation, so that is not a gift to anybody. So people who are demanding lower cost of government, people who are looking to find more job opportunities, who want to see a more vibrant Illinois, don't need a tax freeze, they need tax relief. Companies that are paying some of the highest property taxes in the nation, they need tax relief. Companies that might move to Illinois want to see a place where top property taxes are going down, not up.
So if you freeze property taxes, which in a sense prevents them from getting higher, that is a savings relative to what it would be if you didn't freeze them, but then you go ahead and you turn around and give a $5.4 billion increase in income tax, you're saying that's no good deal because you're raising it on one side, you're keeping it level on the other side, you're saying, no income tax increase.
That's not the kind of reforms Illinois
You're
need.
saying no income tax increase and a property tax freeze. Am I getting that right?
Correct.
Okay. So if you do that property tax freeze, how much do you save overall?
All right, so now let's be real clear about that.
How does the state save money from
All right,
that?
so let's be real clear about that. A property tax freeze by itself, high property tax rates, that's not the problem. That's a symptom of the problem. The real problem is how much our local governments spend. We have the most units of local government in the nation, and they are all staffed by heavy, expensive bureaucracies.
Okay. So it's
that's
a spending by local governments, and the state gets involved because the state subsidizes some of that spending. So you would cut the subsidy of the state to the local government. If the local governments are not getting that subsidy, they're going to spend less. Again,
That's correct.
They'll spend somebody else's money. It's all the Illinois taxpayers' money, but the local government officials look at it, somebody else is paying for it, right?
Well, this is the problem right now, is the local governments get to spend all this state money, but they're not responsible for raising it. So they get a free lunch on that one. What we want to do is make local governments defend their spending.
So how much do you save when you embark on this property
So
tax
we save another
for the state?
Right, so we save another $2 billion for the state when we embark on that.
$2 billion because you eliminate the local government distributive fund.
Let's call it
$1.75 billion or so that
Correct.
goes from the state to these local governments.
Correct. So we eliminate some of these subsidies.
And
remember,
you can
let
get
me say
even
the
more.
very, very important point, Jeff, is for that to happen, we don't want the local people to be hurt by this. So what we want to do is also pair our reforms with giving local governments the power to negotiate better contracts. Because right now, state laws force the government to pay really high rates for a lot of things. And so by empowering local governments to have more power over the contracts they negotiate, that will lower the cost of government.
So you want to empower the local governments to lower their costs. And there's several things that are key ways to do it.
So one of those is right now, the government is forced to negotiate certain things, a lot of things in contracts with the unions. We need to reduce the number of items that are collectively bargained. And that means the mayor isn't forced to pay up all these extra costs.
Does the state need to give the power to the local governments to curtail the scope of collective bargaining?
That's correct.
So they have to pass that legislation. Right now,
Exactly.
if Wilmette, if Hoffman Estates, if Bartlett, if, Springfield, if they want to do these things, they can't.
They can't, right? They're forced by law.
They need the state law to
Sure.
empower them to cut their costs. If they can cut their costs, then they're fine with the property tax freeze, because they can live on less because they're spending less.
Correct.
Is that sort of the
Right,
theory?
and you've got a lot
Now,
of,
is the governor, I know that you're not in politics, but in a sense you are, because you're in a political world. So is the governor, I've heard him talk about the property tax freeze, is he talking about this curtailment of the scope of collective bargaining and going to Speaker Madigan and going to Senate President Cullen and say, look, we need you guys to authorize this change in the law? Because I haven't heard him do that.
no, so we're looking, we want to make sure that whatever deals are done
Right.
include a comprehensive property tax reform. You can't just freeze taxes. It doesn't solve the problem. You've got to do the things that
Have
we
you
talked
said
about.
this to the governor?
We've laid that out in our plans. We've said it to
No,
lots
but
of
you
people.
guys talk. John Tillman's the CEO here, and he probably talks. He's to the governor. Other people talk to the governor.
Well, I'm sure the governor and his team know what's in our plan.
They know, okay.
They know what's in our plan, and they know the kind of things that we're
Do you
saying.
think he's in sync with you folks?
You'll have to ask the governor that directly. I can't tell you that. But what I can tell you is that you can't just pass a short-term property tax freeze. That will not solve the problem. In fact,
You have to do
it
these
might-
other things you're talking
you have
about?
to do-
Okay, because we're going to run out of time. If you do these other things, you save about $3.4 billion in total. We had $3 billion saved, I think, on pensions.
Well,
So we got another billion and a
1.5,
half.
you're double counting because I moved 1.5
Okay.
to pensions. But,
So how much do we have
so
so
you're talking
far?
about 1.6 and 3.5. You're talking about $5 billion right now.
Okay, so where do we get the other 2 to 3
So the
billion?
rest can come from Medicaid reforms and reforms like the cost of state government and the cost of higher ed.
Let's go to higher ed first.
Sure.
Only because that's very important. People are talking about, well, they're all very important, but mostly, a lot in the news about higher ed in Illinois being pinched. They've not received money in the same way education has over these 2 years of no budgets. Now they say they're getting pinched more. They're saying people are applying not to the University of Illinois, but to other institutions out of state because they're not sure if there'll be funding. You've heard all of these things happening.
Absolutely.
Your solution is?
So I think, first of all, we've got to get the narrative right. Illinois universities and community colleges have made a mess of their own making for the last decade and more. Tuitions have jumped 100% in the last decade. The staffing surge has been incredible at the universities. While the student growth has been relatively small, the staffing and the administrative growth, not teachers, not professors, but the administrators has grown tremendously.
Why is that? Why is that?
We'll have to ask the
Well, that's
colleges,
another- that's another show.
But if
Okay.
you look at the
Okay.
executive pay that they get, the number of six-figure salaries that go with those executive staffs and these administrative staffs, it is tremendous how much money has been taken to go there at the expense of either keeping tuitions down or funding MAP grants.
So you've got to get universities in Illinois, colleges in Illinois, to spend less on administrators. And if you can do that, you can save money without hurting students, without raising tuition, without taking teaching resources away.
Right,
Is
the
that
university,
theory?
the universities have become job programs, and they pay executive level pay for those jobs. So we got to unwind that, and that.
How
way
do you
there's
do
enough-
that?
Now, let me explain one
Okay.
thing.
We only got 2 or 3 minutes
Illinois
left.
appropriates much more to higher ed than our neighboring states. We spend a lot of money. So the point is not how much money we spend, but where it goes, and right now it's going to the fat. You got to cut it. You've got to cut those
So
those
what do you
administrative
do
positions.
when, because there's no line item that says fat, what is your recommendation to save money that's going right now to higher ed, but is being wasted on
Well, I
administrators?
think what we're seeing right now, the struggle of the last 2 years without the budget has forced most of those universities to go and look at their administrative staffs and their ineffective programs or programs that are just not efficient, and they're scaling them
You
back.
basically want to go to them and say, cut your spending by 10%. We're advising you, you control it, the boards do of these universities, but we're advising you to cut not teachers, but administrators, cut, say, $500 million, because you're getting $500
Yeah,
million less.
prioritize students over the jobs.
Okay, we only got a minute or 2 left. We're almost up to the $8 billion. AFSCME, that's the other source? Is that
AFSCME, yeah, AFSCME, has the highest.
What is AFSCME? Explain to people.
That's the largest public sector union in the state. It has about 50,000.
Unionize a lot of the state employees. You're saying those salaries, those benefits are too high?
Yeah, so Illinois state employees
We
have the
can't, don't have
highest.
time to go through all of it, but
They have the highest
lots
salaries in
of
the nation.
changes
They
in
have a
that
lot
contract.
lot of great benefits. It's too expensive for the people that pay them.
make these folks more like private sector employees, and you'll save how much?
We'll get another 500 million there.
Okay. So if we've added this up quickly, we're about savings of $7 or $8 billion. right?
And there's more. Medicaid reforms, more dramatic.
Right, okay.
Structural reforms can give you more.
And we haven't even touched reform like school choice, school vouchers, charter schools, where you could actually provide better services
At
at
a
lower
lower
cost.
cost.
We didn't even do that.
No,
Yeah,
there's more to go. There's more to go.
No, but
And we'll be a better
politically,
state.
how do you accomplish this? How do you accomplish it in 1 minute? You got the governor, you got J.B. Pritzker, you got the running in the Democratic primary, Chris Kennedy, Daniel Biss.
Jeff, let me interrupt you. The way you do it
Or
is you listen
got
to the
four
people.
Democrats
You gotta listen
saying
to the
they
people.
disagree with you. They disagree. You understand? All those people say the solution is a progressive income tax in 2018. Cut the tax on 92% of the people, and you'll be fine. The rich will pay for it. And what's wrong with that?
We just did a poll. Illinois do not want tax hikes. People are leaving in record numbers from Illinois, right? Only New York competes with us for losing people. We can't continue down the same path, otherwise we'll lose our tax base, we'll lose our
You think you got
our
the
job
people on
base.
your side?
The people on our side, and that's who matters. Not Pritzker,
So
not Rauner, not.
Ted Dabrowski.
The people are the ones who matter in
I'll
this.
tell you a little bit about Ted, undergraduate degree at Georgia Tech, Wharton Business School, master's in public policy from Harris at the University of Chicago, experience in the private sector, Citibank, 6 years at the Illinois Policy Institute. He didn't just wake up and say, here's an idea. You've been doing this like 5 or 6 years.
No, we've been working on it.
Are you going to make a prediction now, when they see this show, first, second week in June, will there be an increase in tax increase? Will there be a tax increase that passed or no?
No.
Okay, you heard it here first on Public Affairs. Look, thank you so much. We almost got done. We can have a little bit more. Come back, you promised? Ted?
Anytime.